You are now listening to
Chakras and Shotguns. Welcome to Chakras and Shotguns, the podcast that guides you on a journey of spiritual development and personal preparedness. I'm Jen, a former lawyer, now yoga instructor, and lover of tarot.
And I'm Mick, a marketer, Reiki master, and prepper. Did you have an imaginary friend as a kid? Are you sure it was just imaginary? Today we dive into the phenomenon of young kids connecting and communicating with spirits and the unseen. We'll get into theories explaining it, famous examples, and advice for how to handle your kids if they seem to be interacting with the spirit world.
But before we get into that, we do want to remind you to sign up for our mailing list. A couple of weeks ago, we sent out some helpful tips for releasing stagnant energy in the fall season. If you weren't signed up on our list, you missed them. So don't miss out on the next one. Sign up using the link in the show description or on our website, chakrasandshotguns.com.
All right, let's begin as we always do with a breathwork meditation to put us into a mindful place.
All right. So I'm thinking with the theme, it is also spooky season. We're going to do a little meditation that opens us up to receive, and not like anything dark or dense, nothing like that, but being receptive to the universe around us, the pings, the signs, the gentle nudges, the small whispers that can lead us on our path to our highest good. All right, so find a comfortable seat. You're always welcome to lie down. And let's begin. Put a hand on your heart and a hand on your belly. And let's just connect to our breath for a few moments. Take an inhale in through your nose. Expand your belly. And sigh that breath out through your mouth, completely emptying yourself of air. Inhale through your nose, feeling yourself expand, and exhale that breath out through your mouth. Last one together. Inhale in through your nose. Feel all of that air that you're receiving in this moment. And exhale this breath out through your nose. Allow yourself to breathe normally. Maybe take your hands off your heart and your belly and place them on your lap somewhere facing up in a gesture of receiving and being open. Maybe set an intention for this time, whether that's clarity on something that you have asked for a sign on, or just wanting to be more connected to everything that's going on around you. Maybe there's a wall that you have up. Where do you feel closed? And allow yourself to bloom open. I like to finish this time together with a little bit of protection because we don't want to be wide open, child. Imagine a ball of white or golden light above your head. And allow that light to expand and slowly encompass your entire being, your physical body, your aura. And allow yourself to feel safe and protected within that light. Start to wiggle your fingers, your toes, and allow yourself to come back into the room. And opening your eyes last. Welcome back. And let's get on with the show.
Thanks for that, Jen. Always great breath work with you.
Thanks, Boo.
So let's talk about the main topic. I'm going to make a film reference. Hopefully you've seen it. I know we got some Gen Z listeners. Maybe y'all need to get, caught up on some classic cinema. But yeah, the movie The Sixth Sense comes to mind when I think about this topic, right? There's the classic line, I see dead people. I think that really just kind of highlights where we're headed, right? It's spooky season. So let's talk about some kids seeing spirits.
Yeah. Well, first, classic. Like, classic is like Casablanca and, I don't know, Gone with the Wind. Like, The Sixth Sense is a classic now.
It's absolutely a classic.
That movie came out like 2 years ago when I was 12.
Okay. Yeah.
Anyways, kids seeing spirits, back on task. Yes, this is an occurrence that several cultures around the world and throughout history observe and make reference to. For example, Native American tribes such as the Navajo believe that young children are more attuned to the spirit world and can communicate with the old ones.
I don't know how I feel about that. Like if I'm dead and gone, don't call me the old ones.
Baby, you old. You classic.
But I've gone into the energetic realm. I'm not old no more. The body's gone.
You ain't new. I guess it's new to you, but you old to them that's still on Earth, I guess.
It just sounds rude. I mean.
Anyways, the old ones, if you didn't pick up what Mick was putting down, those are ancestral spirits who offer guidance and protection. The belief is that the innocence and purity of young children allows for this communication. And in Japanese folklore, it is believed that young children are more likely to see and interact with kodama, which are tree spirits or forest deities. Don't mind my terrible Japanese pronunciation. But it's the same vibe as the Native American beliefs. These children are pure, innocent, and it makes them, in this case, more receptive to these nature spirits.
So when I was reading about this, both from the Native American standpoint, the Navajo, and the Japanese folklore, it reminded me of one of my favorite books. And if you're an OG listener, I've talked about this book a bunch on the show before. The book is Of Water and Spirit by Malidoma Some. For those unfamiliar, the book basically details the journey of the author, Malidoma. He is growing up in the Dagara culture of Burkina Faso. And essentially, I won't go through all the story of the book, but he is growing up in a time where colonialism is coming in and wiping out a lot of the traditional Dagara beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
The book, though, talks about how specifically in Dagara culture, young children and their grandparents, they have this really close relationship. And the reason for that is they are believed to be the closest to the spirit world, meaning young children who have just come from the spirit world and the older generation, the grandparents who are about to enter. And so they have a lot of wisdom to share with each other, and they both have the ability to kind of connect with the other side, right? Malidoma also talks about in his childhood, he gives a story about how he was out wandering around in the forest, and he came into contact with spirits known as the Kontomble, which are essentially nature spirits, similar to what the Japanese believe, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it just like highlights these similarities, right?
Yeah. There are also similar beliefs in cultures throughout Thailand, Mexico, Nigeria. There's a superstition about babies that you shouldn't show a mirror to a baby. I don't know for how long.
I think it's the first year.
It's like the first year I've heard 6 weeks. I've heard like a span, but it's something about like their soul is almost so new that it could get kind of like snatched up. Basically, it's like they pretty much just left. Like they are fresh.
And mirrors are believed to be portals in a lot of cultures. And so you're exposing this new soul to a portal. It could potentially cause energy loss.
Yeah. And this also made me think about the birth of our second child. She was born in 2021, and this was after our spiritual journey had officially begun. So at that time, Mick and I were doing a lot of meditations, really going within. We had been inside for the pandemic for the whole past year pretty much. And my grandmother's birthday was a couple of weeks before my due date. And my grandmother we were very close when she was here, and we remain very close now that she has passed. And I just had a feeling that she wanted this baby born on her birthday. And so we have her picture on the ancestral altar. I talk to her often, and they were from Louisiana. We called her Mother Dear, but very quickly. And I was like, Mother, I am not ready for this baby to come, because it was going to be a little bit too early. She would have been 2.5, almost 3 weeks early. And I had a lot of shit that I still needed to take care of, and I still needed to do. And so I was like, Mother, I'm not ready for her to come yet. Can you just wait a little bit? And 10 days later, because I kind of felt like she wanted her birthday a little bit represented. So it was the digit is still there, but it's plus 10. This baby showed up. And I just really felt, and also had a reading with Melanie beforehand, that my grandmother was helping my newest daughter become a human being and come earthside and be born and all of these things. And it felt really magical to feel this multiple generational ushering into the whole labor of childbirth is such a thing for mother and baby, but for someone who I was so close to know that they were still watching over me in that moment, and that my child was already very dear to them, because that's also something that I have mourned in a sense in the past of when you start having your kids later, and my mom had me a little bit later, you're not seeing 3-4 generations still alive at the same time. And so I really used to get sad because my grandmother didn't come to our wedding. She's never met my kids in person. And I used to mourn that, but then finding the joy in that there was still possibly a connection there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what does science have to say about this phenomenon regarding kids seeing spirits and interacting with their ancestors?
Surprise. It's mostly written off and dismissed as figments of children's imagination or lack of cognitive development. So imagine you see something and they say, you made it up or you're a little slow. Okay, there's a Reddit, and I've seen Twitter threads like this, but there's a Reddit thread that you can check out called Creepy Kids. So let's even dig into that. Creepy kids, kids being weird as fuck. And there's all kinds of stories of children seeing all kinds of paranormal things, but there's an element that they're immediately kind of writing those kids off too.
Yeah. This kid's weird. He's just creepy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I actually read this article from the Washington Post that was published in 2019. And they were talking to psychologists about this phenomenon. And as you said, it was in the article mostly dismissed, but there was one interesting nugget about imaginary friends that stuck out to me. So there's this belief that they don't have any exact numbers on this, right? But there's projections that between 1/3 and 2/3 of kids have imaginary friends. So roughly half of kids. Imaginary friends used to be considered a precursor to mental illness.
No.
But that perception has changed. And one psychologist in particular said that he has parents who are now coming to him with concern if their kids don't have imaginary friends. So that little nugget, I think, really just highlights how our understanding as a species, scientific community, whatever you want to call it, our understanding continues to evolve. In 20 years, I don't know where we'll be, right? Will science catch up to this indigenous knowledge that we see all across the world?
I'm going to insert a little bit of human design in here because I have an undefined head, and that's something that I have been actively working on all week. I'm just like, my brain is all over the place, and I'm spinning and dwelling and circling and running things over and over in my head. And when you get to facts like this, it reminds you that like, we don't know shit.
We don't know shit.
We don't know nothing. And like, people would come up and they'd be like, hey, if you got a cut, you're feeling kind of ill, your stomach hurt, let's put a leech on it. That'll do it. And they were so sure.
Mm-hmm.
They were so sure
that was working.
And so I'm like, how do I know any of this?
Any of the shit you read in school in a textbook. How do you know if it's legit? Like, you don't.
Oh, well, whoa.
I know.
Whoa.
I know. That's a real crazy question, right? But no, for real. It's real.
And see, this is how you oopsie poopsie yourself into a whole cult and a whole conspiracy.
I know how that sounded. But I stand by it nonetheless. In theory, you can always say that our learning is going to build on itself, right? So there are certain fundamental facts, like we know 2 + 2 = 4, right? But like, don't look at me like that. Yes, 2 + 2 = 4. And there's some basic fundamental building blocks that we will continue to build upon. But certain assertions about like how phenomena are classified, right? This is purely mental illness. This is, they used to say like women having hot flashes was hysteria or something. Like, it was like a whole mental illness, or like I think homosexuality was listed as a mental illness at one point, right? Like these classifications, particularly in the social sciences, that we give to certain things, they become outdated very quickly. That's really the point I was trying to make.
Yeah. And not to make this aside any longer, but I think it's an indictment of the ego and hubris, right?
100%.
Because people don't just say like, man, I don't know what the fuck's going on, but we'll keep looking into it. Like, they're like, I don't know and I don't like it. So it's demonic. It's crazy.
Wrong.
It's wrong. It's depraved. It's, like they'll be like, I have to label this in a way that makes me comfortable, and it makes me uncomfortable, so it must be bad. So yeah, now all the cool kids have imaginary friends, I guess. But I also wanted to bring up the studies that are underway with children in their past lives. Ooh. We've talked about past lives before on the show, and there are instances of children being like, I think probably my favorite one that I've ever seen was this little white blonde boy. He was so sweet, but he was like, I was a black woman in Chicago. And I was like, baby, you were sending your parents for a loop, honey. You had a past life as a black woman, and they were just like, really? But the University of Virginia, which is a very renowned institution, they have a division of perceptual studies, which I feel like makes it sound like a little more legit, less like
yeah.
But they use science to explore the paranormal, and there are multiple institutions that have done this. One of the key figures in this department is Dr. Ian Stevenson, and he has dedicated much of his career to working with children that claim to remember their past lives. Yeah,
this is fascinating to me, particularly because you and I have done past life regression sessions. And in the one I can think of, the first one that we did, and we talked about it in episode 52 with Marcy Barron, that process is all about like taking you from a recent memory to like the moment of birth, right? And so if you're a child, you're closer to that moment of birth, which would, I would think, make it easier to go even further back, right? To like easily jump to that past life. Because like Marcy was walking us through last week what we ate, and then childhood, and then birth. Like, like there were several steps to get us there. So I'd imagine that process would be a lot easier if you're super young. I do want to talk though about the process that UVA uses, and I thought it was super interesting. So basically what they do is they sit down with the children and they hear them out, right? They document the children's accounts of their past lives. They then try and verify the past lives. So the example you mentioned, in that scenario, they would have gone to Chicago. They would have tried to find this Black woman's family, anybody who would have remembered her, depending on like what time period it was, like gone to like places that that person would have gone through that the child remembers going to, right? Like they're trying to like go and document the facts to be able to say scientifically, like, this kid was here.
I'm sorry. Can you imagine? Can you imagine, first of all, someone calls you and you answer, it's an unknown number, and you don't immediately think this is spam. But somebody calls you and they're like, hey Mick, the weirdest thing, I have this little white 2-year-old who says that he's your great Aunt Sally and that she died in a fire. And you'd be like, excuse me?
Like, can you tell me more?
I beg your pardon?
Oh, man. No, but for real, they've done this and they've actually noted like a high degree of accuracy in several cases. So that's wild.
Yeah. Some of the stories are really, really traumatic too. And I always wonder, is that kid okay? Because they're experiencing this really traumatic situation. We watched a docuseries on Netflix a while ago called Surviving Death. And it was a lot of conversations about near-death experiences, but they did go into past lives. And there was someone from the UVA's department who was a child psychiatrist that went to visit the child. And like, so you can see them getting the account and like, you know, they have certain markers because they've done this on a really big scale. So they're like, yo, mama put you up to this. Like they can tell. So it was really, really interesting actually seeing them do the work with an actual child who is remembering something that I just feel like is so mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Also, shout out to that child's mama for even being like, let's look into this. Yeah. Because I would have been like, huh? That is not your name, baby. What are you talking about?
We got to go to school. Put your clothes on. Like,
I mean, I would have been like that. I could have seen myself. But now I'm like, really? Tell me more. One thing that researchers have found is that the children that they work with will sometimes have birthmarks that correlate to injuries or traumatic events from the claimed past lives. And I have seen TikToks where people are like, do you have a birthmark? That's where you got killed in a past life. Now, that's not always the truth. Yeah. Okay. I've also seen people say, do you have a birthmark? Well, that's where you need to, what chakra you need to work on, or this means you eat too much sugar. They just be making shit up. Okay. Yeah. But these researchers, you know, it's documented. They use the scientific method. They have the little trifold poster board. They're legit. They have seen a correlation. But don't go looking for birthmarks on your body being like, I got this on my arm. I must have been stabbed in Camelot. No, it doesn't necessarily mean that. But it's an interesting tidbit.
All right. So let's talk about our own experiences. I've talked before on a previous episode about how me and my sister both had imaginary friends growing up. My dad loves to tell the stories about my friend. The friend's name was Jama. And I used to hang out with them and have all these conversations. And I thought it was, you know, cute little story, whatever. But as I was thinking through this episode and what I wanted to talk about, I was thinking more about Jama, and I was like, I wonder where this name even comes from. Like, where did I hear this? How did this end up being my imaginary friend's name? And so I decided to put my Google fingers to the test, you know, try to figure out if there's any meaning behind it. And so I tried a few different spellings, and some didn't return anything. But I tried the spelling Jhuma, Juma. And it came up as a Hindi name that means child's plaything. And that freaked me out. I mean, I can't even make that up, right?
Yeah, Mick told me that, and I was that Viola Davis meme. I think I had to go somewhere anyway, but I just grabbed my purse and I left.
Yeah, that was trippy. So I don't know how I received that information. It is not something that is top of mind now, but apparently when I was 3, 4, 5 years old, Jama was the homie. I also remember that there was a spirit in my closet growing up. And like most kids, my parents did not believe me. It really, really scared me. I remember all the time, like I was freaked out about it. And I remember saying out loud that I did not want to see it anymore. And I think about some of the guests we've had on who have had really kind of scary, startling experiences and kind of wishing that they didn't have that ability to see those spirits. And like, I think about that all the time, that like in that moment, I could have potentially like shut myself off from that.
Mm.
And then fast forward, I ended up doing a ceremony with a couple of healers. And one of the healers was a medium, and she contacted my grandfather who passed before I was even born. And he mentioned to her that he would watch over me and spend a lot of time, like basically being like a guardian spirit for me. Mm. And I think that might have been him in my closet, like just kind of watching me, like hanging out, like watching me sleep, like just being a protective spirit for me. And I was freaking out because I could see him and not wanting to, you know, have that experience of seeing something that was quote unquote not real. Right. Mm. So, yeah.
Yeah. I did not have an imaginary friend, but I'm still cool. I'm still hip, whatever. I did have some like random, like claircognizance kind of moments of like knowing something. Mm-hmm. My aunt woke me up one time. She was at my house and I was like asleep and she woke me up. I felt very roughly and I woke up and I said, never work at a nursing home. And she looked at me and was like, what did you say? And I was like, what? She was like, what? I said, well, don't work in a nursing home. Like, you'll scare people. And she had just applied to volunteer in a nursing home. But I was like, you could have given me a heart attack. Why are you waking me up like that? But, you know, I like logicked it away.
Yeah.
But they were like, that was really spooky. They thought it was a little...
If it had been like 20 years later, you would have been in the Creepy Kids Reddit.
I would have been. She didn't need to work in a nursing home anyway. Our kids, though, they have interactions with what they call monsters. And we're still we just ask questions.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, what does it look like? And what are they wearing? And they tend to be pink and purple. I don't know why.
Sometimes.
And so we've coached them to work with their guardian angels for protection. Yeah. So they know to call on their angels and know that they will be protected.
Yeah. We actually had another story related to our girls. They've had an experience with one of their ancestors who recently passed. So back in April, my grandmother, she passed away and she was really close to our girls. They used to FaceTime her all the time and just have chats. And they just kind of developed this really special bond. And I think for both of them, this was their first time even thinking about the concept of death. After she passed, both of them ended up having distinct experiences with her spirit. My youngest, on the way to school one day, this was a few days after my grandmother passed, I was driving her to school and I heard her having this extensive conversation in the backseat. She was just blabbing away, and at that point wasn't as clear of a speaker as she is now. So it was like some words I can make out, but some of it was just kind of mumbled baby gibberish a little bit. And this was unusual. Like typically she's pretty quiet in the car because it was just her and me. And so we were just kind of riding, listening to some of the music that she likes to listen to. And I kind of turned the music down and I was like, hey, who are you talking to? And very matter of factly, she was just like, grandmama. And that's what they call my grandmother. I said, oh, okay. And what did she say? And she said, again, very flatly, grandmama gave me a hug and said, I love you. And I was just like, oh, okay. Stunned.
Yeah. I think, and sometimes I'll even second guess them, not out loud, but like, are they really seeing what they think they're seeing? But we only ask questions and they're not leading questions. It's like, oh, tell me more. What did you see? And what did they say? And, you know, some may say like that's encouraging them to make a story. But at that point, she was too young to have conjured up a story like that. And I think also they had a very special bond and they don't ask like where she is. Mm-mm. They're very clear. They're like, yeah, she died. And like, they're very clear as to like what happened. Mm-hmm. And I would expect that with maybe the 5-year-old, like, oh, well, maybe she understands, but she doesn't understand. But like the 2-year-olds got it. Like she's just like, yeah, she's gone. She died.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not sad. And I feel like because they know she's still accessible to them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's interesting as I talk to other folks in our generation about how they deal with that type of experience from their children. I think it's very different from how our parents reacted in those situations.
You would have freaked out. Mine would have. I don't know. Your dad seemed cool about Jama.
Yes. But that was an imaginary friend, right? So he kind of, again, dismissed that as like, oh, that was just, childhood development thing.
I honestly thought Black kids didn't have imaginary friends until I met you.
Dang, she really just... Did you pull my black card off of Jama?
It was not something that I heard. Well, I think by the time like people knew about imaginary friends, we had probably kind of aged out of them.
Okay.
So then like my only references were probably like on TV and in movies. And then like maybe I was watching something and like a kid had an imaginary friend and then maybe my mama was like, that's weird. Or like, it'd be like, so-and-so got an imaginary friend. And it was like, that's odd. And like, I was very much part of that. I was part of the problem. I really thought that that was something that we did not have access to.
Well, if it wasn't for my sister, shout out to my sister. If it wasn't for her, I would feel very alone in this Black experience with imaginary friend. But I had her. I still have her.
I think maybe one time we were dating and you asked me if I had an imaginary friend. I was like, no. And you were like, I did. And I was like, oh. Oh, okay.
Oh, man. Okay. Well, I think according to the advice that at least I've seen from child psychologists, we're doing all right in how we approach this subject with our kids, right? The stuff I read, they still a little, skeptical about the whole experience. They take the stance that ghosts are figments of the imagination. They say things like, work within the fantasy with your child. Engage with the child as to what the ghost spirit looks like and what it does, right? As opposed to like really believing that this could be something possible, which is fine, I guess. But they give the advice of, asking if the child is scared of the ghost and if she likes it and if she's seen it before. And then you can try to disarm the fear that the child might have towards the ghost to kind of help the child move past it. So they say things like, oh, pretend the ghost is in bunny underwear. But yeah, they still kind of take this tone of disbelief, which is fine, I guess. We're just a little more advanced.
Yeah. We're ahead of the curve. I have read that children are the most in tune with the spirit world up until around age 7. And that's typically when the world conditions them out of it. So I think we take the approach of belief so that if they do become desensitized to the spirit world, it won't be because of us. And when we had Jackie Hilbrick on the show a while ago, I asked the question, like, when you started tapping in as a child and you were seeing auras, like, what did your mom say? Like, I'm very fascinated by that because I want to know, how do we create space, not even necessarily encourage, but like hold space for what that child is experiencing. It also makes me think, this is like another aside to the aside, I guess, of I was in therapy once and my therapist was talking about how parents intentionally, unintentionally gaslight their children. And it's very, very subtle, right? Like, there's a ghost in that corner. No, there's not. So I'm telling you that what you're seeing is not what you're seeing. And so warping that reality, like that's literally what gaslighting is. But if their reality includes a spiritual realm and we're saying, no, that's not what's there, then we're shutting that sense down.
Wow. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's like you're conditioning their brain to not believe that sense is actually a part of reality. That's deep. Yeah, I could talk about this all day, but we got to go.
I got to go get these kids, see what they've seen today.
We'd love to hear from you guys, though. So shoot us a DM with any of your spirit stories from your childhood or from any kids in your life. If you're cool with us sharing, we'll post some of our favorites on our IG story.
Maybe we'll put them on the Ticker Talkers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's the show. Friendly reminder, join our mailing list. You want all the deets. You want to be in the know. You don't want to miss out on the discount codes. You don't want to miss out on the events. Come on.
All right, guys. If you're loving the show, please subscribe and give us 5 stars wherever you listen.
Namaste.